Welcome to r/MaliciousCompliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. And today we have 3 great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story, boss committed illegal actions, and I told the head of security advice about it. The second story, sales manager lies and coerces me into purchasing parts for an unnecessary car repair. The third story, I quit my job and didn't warn my boss about it. And the first story is, play illegal games, win legal prizes. I worked for a large drug chain as a frontline manager. For this chain, the pharmacist is the owner of the shop. They run it, but the company still owns the whole thing. I guess it's like they're a corporate franchisee. Anyway, this shop had a history of not being able to keep a manager in the role I just took on for very long. The training was practically non-existent, and nothing was documented. On with the show. One day within my first 3 months, I'm sick as a dog and can barely get out of bed. As it's a health and wellness business, and as I couldn't work even if I wanted to, I called into the back of the house manager. This manager acts as the assistant manager to the owner, as they were real-life friends. I said I was sick and couldn't be into work. I was asked who would be covering for me, as I had to open the shop every day, and I said I didn't know. I was told that as a manager, I was responsible for this and needed to find someone. Fair enough. Even though nobody told me about this, I pulled out my staff listing and found someone to cover my shift who had keys and could open the store. Keep in mind that most of my staff were part-time/students at the time, and I only had one full-time employee that worked Monday through Friday. When I got into work the next day, the assistant manager told me that I couldn't call in sick, and that the next time I called in sick, I shouldn't bother coming back. I was shocked, as this is very unprofessional, and I didn't expect it coming from the second-in-command at the store. My one full-time employee starts telling me that I'm the best manager they've had for the last 2 years, and during that time, they went through 6 managers before me. I'm told that I've done more in my time there than all the previous managers did in total. Things like having the staff cash out on company time, not making people stay to find errors and recount on their own time, basically not breaking labor laws. So the owner calls me into their office and tells me that due to my sick day, I won't be paid for it, as I'm still on probation, and that the accountant who does the payroll will be instructed as such. This was unexpected, as I'm a salaried employee, and probation or not, I know this isn't right, but I agree and get on with my day. Being that there were lots of part-time and students that worked here, we had an actual punch clock to clock in and clock out for all employees, including me. Being a salaried manager, whenever one of my staff couldn't work, and if I couldn't find a replacement, I end up covering the shift myself. I looked at it like an opportunity to get to know my evening staff better, as I usually never saw them. On the paycheck that my sick day happened, I also needed to cover a few extra shifts for other employees, as everyone seems to get sick at about the same time. And as the manager, I'm the one who totals up the time cards prior to giving them over to the accountant. These time cards can't be faked, as they're physically punched and encoded with dates and times from the machine. I handed my team's time cards with mine on top to the accountant, who looks at me and reminds me about the instructions she's gotten from the owner. She didn't like it but had her orders. I tell her that I understand and here's my time card. She looks at it, raises her eyebrows at me, and before she can ask a question, I remind her that I'm not a salaried employee, as I'm still on probation, and that normal pay rules should apply, even though this is illegal. She looks at me, smiles, and confirms that was what she was told by the owner. It turns out that deducting the sick day I missed, but adding on the 3 extra shifts I had to work that period to cover for other staff not showing up, I ended up working 96 hours that payday. So because I wasn't salaried, the accountant paid me time and a half for the extra 16 hours I worked. Because I knew that these things weren't really legal, I decided I was done with this company and this boss. I emailed my friend who helped me get the job, who just happened to be the head of their corporate security, with the story I just told, and gave him permission to send it to whoever he thinks would need to see it. Later that week, I got a call from another employer asking if I could start immediately. I said yes, of course, and went back into work. This call happened just after I had gotten home from work. Yes, before cell phones were a thing. I walked into work, went into the back office to collect my personal effects, and came back out. My shift supervisor was perplexed, as I had just left for the night. I shook his hand and told him that it was nice working with him. He was shocked and asked, "You're firing me?" I actually lolled at that and told him, "No, I'm quitting. You get to keep working here." I went to hand my keys in resignation to the night pharmacist and told them to pass it on to the owner. My letter consisted of "I quit," signed OP. I went back a few weeks later to get some stuff. I still shop there as it's close to my home. And the one full-time employee says, "Hi," with a big smile, and tells me the following in hushed tones. "A few days after you left, some suits from head office came in, had a meeting with the owner and left. When the owner left after that day, they haven't seen the owner since. Seems the suits came in and took the store away from them based on owner's inability to keep your old position filled." Employee didn't know about the email I sent to the head of security, but when I mentioned it, the employee lit up like a light bulb and said, "So that's why." The icing on the cake for me was that the owner knew about this connection I had with the head of security, as they were listed as a reference, and the owner contacted them directly about the referral. Doing illegal stuff to someone with a direct line to the head of security is probably not a good idea. The second story is, trick a naive woman into paying for unnecessary car parts? You'll lose business from the entire community and your job. My family's from a pretty small town. It has a population of roughly 3,500 people, mostly old folks, but it serves as a hub of commerce for all the surrounding towns. Due to this, my town has a handful of car dealerships, and the one my family buys from is the most popular of all the local dealerships. So a few years ago during harvest season, I came home to help out, and it just so happened that my car, 1998 and in excellent shape, needed an oil change. Given that it's the busy season and my family is occupied trying to pull the crop from the ground, I decided to take my car into the local GM dealership. This dealership has been selling vehicles and parts to my family for literal generations, so I trusted them. I pull in, toss my keys into the hands of one of the mechanics after some idle chatter, and then get cozy in the waiting room. Less than a half hour passes, and I'm approached by the sales manager, Ronald, who's holding a stack of papers. Now, Ronald is one of the older men within the dealership. He's stern-faced and well-respected in his position. So when he sticks a pile of paperwork under my nose and tells me my brakes are going and they need to be replaced ASAP or else, I'm rightfully scared. Now, I'm a young woman and I know almost nothing about cars. So what do? I call my dad. My dad answers my call, irritated because he's being interrupted in the middle of his work, and tells me to order the parts and he'll replace the brake pads himself. So I relay this to the sales manager. He begrudgingly hands me over to the parts manager. The information I was given was that my brake pads were almost entirely into the red, and my rotor needed to be replaced as well, because it was almost entirely rusted out. I find this information to be strange. You can usually tell when your brakes are going, right? So a simple repair easily turns into a $400 expense. I'm a university student, and after buying what I was told to, I knew I was going to be eating only ramen for the rest of the month. Some time passes, harvest is done, and my dad comes storming into the house one day. Now what you need to know is that my dad has an explosive temper. He'll lose his SH over the smallest inconvenience. But this time, his rage was almost entirely silent, save for the stomping and slamming of the doors. It's then I'm told to put on some pants because we're going into town. The entire 15 minutes of the trip was quiet. I was silently SHing myself the whole way until we pulled up to the dealership. For some context, my family is a relatively big name in our community, as my father and 3 of my uncles all have their own separate homegrown businesses. A lot of their success is owed to some of the community, and as a way of saying thanks, my family frequently makes donations to public projects. So it's pretty difficult to do business in town without running into someone who shares my surname. Inside the dealership, my dad tells me to sit down and shut up, while he storms into the sales manager's office, closing the door behind him. My dad almost instantly explodes with rage, and even through the shut door, everyone in the dealership heard exactly what my dad had to say. To summarize, Ronald the sales manager lied to me, which isn't much of a surprise. You hear stories about people getting the wool pulled over their eyes all the time, especially women. Turns out when my dad graciously began to replace my brake pads, he noticed immediately that I had been told a load of BS. My brake pads were hardly worn, and my rotor was perfectly fine. His only daughter had been tricked out of a lot of money, and he was peeved. So my dad replaced everything and gave Ronald what was coming. He laid it out, telling Ronald exactly what he was going to do. My dad was going to tell everyone. He was going to tell his business partners, his friends, my uncles and their customers, and everyone in the local pub that night the truth, and how everyone's favorite GM dealership tried to screw over his kid. My dad's a pretty popular guy, and he knew how to work the power that small towns held. You see, if the daughter of an influential businessman can get screwed over, what about everyone else's kids and grandkids? In less than a week, word had spread across the entire town. That same year, the amount of GM vehicles around town became fewer and fewer. A new parts shop opened up next door to my uncle's electrical shop. And it just so happens the Ford dealership in town built a brand new building to accommodate the influx of business just last year. I know firsthand that my family, extended included, buy their GM and Chevy vehicles from the province next door. I'm absolutely certain that if this town wasn't as small as it was, nothing would have happened to the dealership or Ronald. But it goes to show the power of tight-knit communities. Old Ronald was eventually encouraged to retire, and the best part? My dad and I left the dealership that day with a personal check tucked in my wallet as an apology. No more ramen for me. The last story is, change my schedule? Okay, whatever you say, boss. A few years ago, I was working for a small company that had 2 office locations, Office A and Office B. Each office had its own office manager. Let's pretend their names are Susan and Ashley, respectively. Ashley was a new manager, and Susan has been there for over 10 years. They're both terrible, but at least Susan was competent at her job. For some reason, Ashley did not like me. I think it was because I was the youngest, and she had to prove something as a new manager, and I was the easy target. Her management style was horrible. She never helped out and would always micromanage us. She walked around the small office announcing she was the boss every 5 minutes without doing any work. The staff and I like to say, whatever you say, boss, behind her back, when she tells us to do something. So, my schedule rotates between the 2 offices. The second week of Ashley being my boss, she tells me that she was going to switch my schedule and have me work at Office B full-time with her. I know she just did this to keep me under her thumb. It made no sense whatsoever. I had another job offer lined up and only told Susan and the other staff about it, so I played along. Okay, you're the boss. The next day I showed up at Office B, but my regular schedule meant I should have been working at Office A that day. Mind you, this is a small company with 5 staff per office, so when one of us is sick or on vacation, the work gets very overwhelming. Susan is frantically calling me on the office phone and asking where I was and why I didn't call to tell her I wasn't coming in. I told her that Ashley had switched my schedule and I did the innocent voice. Oh, she didn't tell you? Did she at least update the main schedule in our system? Do you want to speak to her on the phone? I called Ashley over and handed her the phone, and all I hear is very loud, inaudible yelling from Susan. Susan does not like Ashley. I couldn't stop smiling from their conversation. All Ashley said on the phone was, yes, okay, I understand, yes. When she hangs up, I asked Ashley slyly, oh, you didn't inform Susan of my schedule change? Next time you should have these changes approved by our boss. And you do know where the main schedule is, right? She just walked away. I was having a field day. An hour later, Susan called again to ask if I would be willing to drive over to Office B. I said I would, but since I'm on company's time now, the owner would have to compensate my time commuting and gas mileage. I know the owner was a total cheapskate, so he would never agree to it. Susan asked to speak to Ashley again, and the second phone call was even funnier. I'm not sure what happened afterwards because I left the office for my new job 2 weeks later. Maybe this was rude of me, but I had an offer before Ashley was hired, so only the owner, Susan, and staff knew I was leaving. On my last day, the owner asked Ashley if she interviewed anyone yet to replace me. The look on her face was priceless. She had no idea. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.